most times.
Did you get a soda? I didn't. Iced tea, I think my brain
I am?
exploded
I'm
on
voting.
me.
Now they tell me.
That's just so you know, Mahoney double dipped his chip.
That got recorded.
Get that in the minutes, will
Get
you?
that, no, that is not part of the record. Did you see that episode? It's hilarious.
Yeah, I know. We are recording.
Okay,
Are we ready?
all right.
Yes.
All right, thank you. We are going to call the regular meeting of the Oregon City Planning Commission to order. Today is Monday, June 11th, and we now are back on tape and everything, so we are ready to rock and roll, unless something crazy happens to it like it did before. Do we have any comments from the public for items that are not currently on the agenda as we have it tonight? We are here to listen to whatever it is that you have to say. Everybody's sitting with their arms crossed. That means everybody's mad. Okay,
Or
all
cold.
right. Or are you cold? Well,
We finally got the air
I'll let you
going.
know when it's cold, because you know I'm the one that's always cold and stuff's blowing right down on our heads.
They're getting
Okay,
ready.
so seeing no one in the, everybody's now gonna uncross their arms because I brought it to your attention. We do not have anybody tonight, so going once, going twice, okay, so no public comments. Tonight on our agenda, we have one public hearing, and that is a public hearing on a remand. And we are going to go through our usual spiel, and then I'm going to ask the city attorney to, oh yes, thank you. We have some things here, okay. Alrighty, so we have some folks, thank you. Hang on just a second, you guys. I have a lot of paper here, a lot of agendas. So we have, as I stated, a remand on our agenda tonight, and it has been scheduled. It was notified in advance, 7 days prior to this hearing. It's not the first hearing. We have a staff report which identifies the approval criteria that applies to the specific item that is being remanded, and we are going to be reviewing that. We're going to be following the City of Oregon City's Oregon City Municipal Code, and our hearing procedure is outlined and on the chart, as many of you do know. And for those who wish to speak, they have filled out a speaker's card, so thank you. If you decide at the last minute you want to speak, just come on up and we'll get you to fill it out afterwards.
Are you?
It was on.
Is that?
Please begin all the testimony by stating your name. Testimony and the evidence should be directed to the specific item that we are discussing tonight. If you believe other criteria apply, other than that identified in the staff report, you will need to explain to us why you believe that they are applicable and why we should be considering it. What about the written material? I think I should just skip that down because everybody's already done that. There will be no continuance on this particular item. And the Planning Commission will be making a decision tonight, but if we make a decision that you disagree with, you have the right to.
That's not quite right. This is a
remand.
comprehensive plan amendment and zone change, so it's
right.
going to be a recommendation of the
To the City
Planning
Commission,
Commission
right.
to the City Commission.
Right. Well, if we make their decision, it's going to go to the City Commission. They can still disagree with it. Anyway, as you know, if you fail to raise the specific issue as it goes up to the City Commission, you will need to be very specific about that to allow us and the designee to respond. And if you don't, it precludes your appeal for damages. We're going to open the file. I guess we don't have a remand number, do we? So it's remand of the Land Use Board of Appeals Court of Decision for Planning File PZ 1501 and ZC 1503. Property located near the intersection of Beaver Creek Road and Highway 213. I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners about whether they have had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare. And whether or not you went back and visited the site again. So I'll start with Vern.
No, nothing to disclose.
Only what I can see from Beaver Creek when I drive back and forth going to the school. Other than that, I haven't visited the site since the original case.
Bob?
No, I have
Nothing new to declare for me.
I have nothing to declare.
Yeah, and I don't either. All right.
Anybody in the audience wish to question the commissioners?
We don't really have anything for them to question, but does anybody want to question us about the stuff that we said that we didn't do? Because we didn't. Okay, great. All right, before we open the, get on with the staff report, I would like Carrie to go over very specifically about what it is we are going to be reviewing and hearing tonight.
Okay, thank you. This is as the chair mentioned, this is a remand proceeding. So you may recall a few years ago, you reviewed a plan amendment and zone change for this property. The decision was appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals. And the Land Use Board of Appeals found that the city erred with respect to one issue. And that one issue had to do with Goal 5 resources. And the city has inventoried its Goal 5 resources. Goal 5 includes all of sort of the livability goal, the natural resources, historic preservation, open spaces, wetlands, those sorts of things. So the city has adopted inventories to identify what Goal 5 resources it's going to protect. And in this case, the city has reviewed its Goal 5 inventories and determined that the only inventory designated Goal 5 resource on this property is Newell Creek, affected by the comp plan amendment and zone changes Newell Creek. And LUBA thought that was the case, but we have provided evidence in the record as part of this that indeed our adopted Goal 5 inventories include only Newell Creek. And so the question that you have been charged with, what LUBA said was that we didn't evaluate sufficiently whether or not our existing regulations to protect Newell Creek were adequate given the new use. The new uses are mixed use rather than residential. Mixed use could potentially have greater stormwater runoff. Does the city have adequate regulations in place to protect Newell Creek? That is the only issue before you tonight. That issue does not include the quality of Newell Creek. It does not include revisiting the city's Goal 5 inventory. It does not include revisiting whether or not the city's entire program to protect Goal 5 resources is adequate. It does not include, it's a very limited question. And so we have, the city commission, the matter was remanded from LUBA to the city commission. The city commission remanded the matter back to you to take evidence on this limited question of whether the MUC zone impacts from the worst case development, the worst case development will adversely affect whether the existing program is sufficient to protect Newell Creek. Will it adversely affect Newell Creek? And there's some evidence that has been submitted to say, and then the city has submitted a staff report to say that it does not. So that is the only issue for you to consider tonight. We can, in another proceeding, if you want to, revisit the quality of Newell Creek and revisit our Goal 5 inventory. These are all within the city's scope to do, but that's not the limited issue we've been asked to revisit tonight. So the other thing I want to point, I am going to ask folks when they submit testimony tonight that they state how the testimony relates to the limited issue on remand. And I'm going to ask the commission to weigh in on evidence that when there may be a doubt about whether or not it is related to this limited issue, and if it is not related, we're going to strike it, because we want to keep the record to the limited issue we've been charged with reviewing. You will make a recommendation tonight, or when you decide to make a decision, and that recommendation will go to City Commission. The City Commission's review will be on the record. So you are making the record just like you do in all of your quasi-judicial reviews. So I just wanted to make that real clear to you and everyone in the audience.
So when you say protect Newell Creek, you're saying that whether or not the programs in place maintain or improve the quality of water and sediment and wildlife,
And temperature and
Right.
velocity and.
stream quality, I guess
Stream
would be
quality.
the catch-all for that. So, if it keeps the water temperature great, but all the monarch butterflies are gonna die because of off-gassing, then it's a bad thing. But if everything is at least as good as it is today, and better, and potentially better, then but
That's the inquiry has to do with whether or not our existing program is adequate.
right,
And the existing program consists of grading standards, stormwater standards. Erosion control, natural resource development standards, and then the city's stormwater grading and design standards. If I got the right, I probably got the grading and the design standards in the wrong order.
but, yeah, okay. So I just wanted to make sure we understood what you meant by protect. It doesn't mean put a cap over it or stick it in a tunnel. It means that the conditions that exist today will be no worse.
Well, our program is sufficient to protect.
Right.
Denise,
Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Carrie, what you just mentioned there seems to me to be pretty technical stuff, which through testimony here tonight, I would suspect that we're not going to get a lot of information from the general public. Now, it's our responsibility to ask questions of the staff who have authored this and inventory this type of information so that they can enter into the record? Is that the process?
Well, I think the question is whether or not the program, whether or not development in the MUC, right, a mixed-use development will have stormwater that is detrimental to the water quality of Newell Creek, right? Do I think that takes an expert? I think the answer is yes. That's why the city used its engineers to evaluate this, and that's why the applicant put in testimony from a wetland consultant and other experts who
Okay. All right.
evaluate water quality and know what the stormwater treatment options are, because I don't know what they are.
Well, that's what I was getting at. The source of this information either going to come from our technical staff or from the applicant's
Or
consultant. one of the
some
two.
other qualified
Yeah,
expert, I would
okay.
think.
So that's the type of information that's got to get into the record that we adopt as a finding. Okay, I got you. All right.
Any other questions before we move forward with the staff report? I'll turn it over to Ms. Turway.
Not yet.
Sorry.
Before she does, just want to ask one question. So not for anybody to speak up, but just raise your hand. Is anybody here from a recognized neighborhood association?
No?
Anybody here from a recognized CPO that's been authorized? Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how to manage the time. I want to make sure that if somebody's here from those, that we give them the time that they're supposed to have, so.
All right. Okay,
Go ahead.
All right, before I start, I wanted to introduce to you Josh Wheeler to my right. He is our Development Services Manager. He's here to answer any questions you have about Stormwater Manual, and he'll be a great resource to us tonight. All right, Carrie did a great introduction, so we can kind of, I want to touch on everything one more time, just because this is a bit of a complicated story that to get to this point. So we have a property located near the intersection of Beaver Creek and 213. You can see it's outlined in blue. Back in 2015, there was an application for a zone change and a comprehensive plan amendment from these various residential zoning designations and comprehensive plan designations to mixed-use corridor comprehensive plan designation, and specifically MUC2 zoning designation. That zoning designation is familiar to us as it's on the opposite side of 213 along Beaver Creek Road. Think Nelson's Nautilus area.
It's only the brown one, right? Just so people-
That's the existing zoning designation.
Comprehensive plan does the MR.
That medium density residential
Yeah.
is, and then is the darker brown, and then low-density residential is the lighter yellow. So this has been to a few courts, so City Commission to Luba to Court of Appeals, State Supreme Court did not hear the case, and then back down again to give us authorization to take a look at this Goal 5 inventory resource. So again, the question is, when we went through the appeal, there were other items on the appeal. What the court said is that we didn't provide sufficient evidence to determine if the zone change and comprehensive plan amendment would conflict with Goal 5. So that's a question. Does this change from various residential to mixed-use corridor 2 cause any potential conflicts for Goal 5? And the Goal 5 inventories are listed on the screen. We'll kind of go through each of them. No other concerns were identified. As you know, when you do a zone change and comprehensive plan amendment, there's lots of criteria. So really, we're just focusing in on this one specifically. This is a slightly complicated graphic. Really, it is a flow chart to let us know what to do. So what the court says is figure out if you have any potential conflicts. So between those two zoning designations with conditions, since again, there's some uses that the applicant had proposed to stricken from the MUC2 zoning designation, is there any potential conflict with our program as it stands today? If the answer is no, no further analysis needed. If the answer is, well, maybe, then you either deny the application or you go through an amended Goal 5 process to sync that up. Here is the first tract, no conflicts, and then here's that other tract where there is potential conflict. So you have a couple different options on how to move forward through this flow chart. I'm going to go through each of our potential Goal 5 resources just to show you that we don't believe that there are any inventoried. Carrie had originally talked about Knoll Creek being our only resource that was inventoried. First, we have a flood management overlay district. As you can see on the screen, it's nowhere near the subject site, which is identified in red. We also have historic districts and individually designated landmarks. This is not included, or adjacent to any of those. We have our Willamette River Greenway overlay district, which is near the river, which is not within any proximity to this property. And we have our natural resource overlay district, which is one thing we want to talk a little bit more about. So you can see the overlay district identified in purple. So it includes inventories of wetlands and streams, all types of streams and features, and we protect them through the use of vegetated corridors. So it should be stream, lush native vegetation, then development. There is an analysis in the staff report about the standards or the program in Chapter 1749. We do have an acknowledged program. It's important to note that we do have properties that are zoned MUC, and in particular also MUC2, that are mapped within our NROD buffer. So we are utilizing protections within the Natural Resources Overlay District on MUC property and other places in the city already. So we have standards that apply to zone. There's lots of places you can, so Nelson's Nautilus area, that part we talked about, Knoll Creek, same general creek, does come up in the Natural Resource Overlay District, protecting it, does come onto those MUC2 properties. We also have on 7th and Molalla, so 7th has portions of the creek that come up and have a vegetated corridor protecting it, that are also zoned MUC2 or MUC1. We have recently approved a parking lot for a building on 7th Street, utilizing the standards in our program in 1749. There's a lot of documentation in the record. I'm not going to go through it in detail. I'll let the applicant explain those for you. It's a good question about burden. I'm going to do an overview to you. We believe we have everything in the record that sufficiently shows that our program as a whole provides that equal protection. And the applicant has that burden of proof, so they'll give you, supplement some of that as well. So there's a lot of documents in the record as it relates to 1749. You have a little bit of testimonies from some wetland scientists and certified professionals as well. One thing that I did want to acknowledge is that I am hereby entering into the record our 1999 inventory from Shapiro and Associates. I did upload it both onto our website on the agenda earlier this afternoon as well as on your computer, so it's before you now. And it identifies this stream. I'm going to use the pointers, so my apologies for those of you who have to turn around, but you can see the feature sign coming on the southern portion of the property. The next thing that we would want to look at through Goal 5 if there's scenic and open spaces and we don't have any designated on or near the site. Stormwater is the last thing, and that's really probably we'll end up talking about the most. So the question is, could the uses in MUC2 affect stormwater differently than any development in the residential? So things like we were talking about, volume, velocity, increased level of contamination, contaminants. How does our program as a whole protect us? So there's a screenshot of our stormwater and grading design standards. It's a long name. There's information in the record from a variety of engineers, as well as other people speaking to our standards and its level of protection. Let's see. So with that, I'm going to sort of wrap up this presentation. We believe with the information in the record that we have sufficient evidence to show that our program as a whole equally protects Knoll Creek or our Goal 5 inventoried from development, whether it was residential or whether it's commercial. We use the same stormwater manual with the same standards. We have the same 1749 vegetated corridor associated with it, providing those buffer zones for the streams. And so we believe that if that is the conclusion the commission should reach as well, that no further analysis is needed. So our recommendation is that you agree that our regulatory scheme does provide that equal level of protection. Please ask us any questions. We want to make sure that we have everything in this record this time so that you feel comfortable in what we're doing. I understand a lot of this is technical. So please do not be shy asking questions. The other thing is that we are recommending a tentative decision should the commission feel comfortable tonight and a closure of the record, and we can come back with final findings for you at another hearing as well. That's it.
Got a question for you.
Yeah.
That Knoll Creek was designed to be routed down Highway 213 on the opposite side of the highway, if I understand. Am I correct in that? Do I understand that, right? Should I go underneath 213?
It does go underneath 213.
It does. Okay, so what you're saying is that stormwater runoff is being taken away from the site in question, the mixed-use site, what have you, by design, down to a natural.
Yeah, let me introduce Josh and have him just do a couple sentences about the stormwater, since that is a large piece of this.
Good evening. The general answer to your question is, currently the developer has not provided any design plans or anything like that to tell us exactly how drainage would occur on the site. However, our stormwater and grading design standards would provide direction and guidance on how to design that site so that no additional volume, no water quality would be reduced for what type of use they would place on that property.
But what I'm getting at is once that stormwater gets off that site, it becomes the responsibility of the city. Am I correct? To direct that water? I mean, he's not gonna take and make improvements all the way down Newell Creek just to get water off of his site. Is he expected to do that?
There are two things about that. One is they are required to do a downstream analysis to ensure that the water that they're placing there will not cause any downstream harm. But the second thing is that's kind of a secondary review. The original standards prevent that from likely ever being possible in the first place because of the standards they're held to make it so that it would never be a downstream issue. And so even though we maintain the streams as a public works department, downstream, it'll look like it did today as it will 2 years from now if they were to build.
Go ahead.
So, what you're saying is that nothing should leave that property that would impact the current stream quality?
No, correct, no water would be affecting anything. So whatever they do has to enter a stream or a storm sewer in the same exact way it did before they got there.
Okay.
For volume and quality.
Well, I would think we'd want to improve it because I
Well-
doubt there's any stuff happening on there that's doing anything to improve it because that property was developed when it was in the county and wouldn't have met any of our standards anyway. And I don't know what the county standards would have been when they developed that bus barn, so.
But the key is it can't get any worse than it is today. So,
Well, how do you control chemicals from an asphalt-covered area that enters into a public water runoff system? Because we've all heard about chemicals in asphalt and parked cars and things of that nature over time.
So I'm going to get into some little technical jargon here, so I'll try and minimize it as much as possible, but the city's stormwater standards were developed based on the requirements of the Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, and our what's called the NPDES permit. And that permit requires all cities and counties in Oregon to follow a certain set of standards. And we have a permit that is on file now. I think it's actually part of this actual file that says that we fall under that, and we've been approved by Department of Environmental Quality to follow that. Our stormwater standards then follow all of those NPDES requirements. And the big ones of those are if pollution were to occur from a spot situation, then we have responsibilities to look for an illicit discharge, which is what that's called, and make sure where it came from and then prevent it from happening and require any cleanup. For any new development, we are required to follow our stormwater standards, which not only deal with stormwater volume, but also deal with stormwater quality. And our standards in Chapter 4 of our manual says that the water quality facilities, which are referred to as BMPs, best management practices, also called LIDs, low impact development, could be things like rain gardens, infiltration trenches, holding ponds, all various types of things. And we have a hierarchy of what we prefer more. When we can do the higher preferred ones, you do them, and if not, then you keep going down that hierarchy to what can be done. And that would capture and treat 80% of the average annual runoff volume to the maximum extent practical. So sometimes it's not practical, so you look at that from an engineering standard, but more often than not, 80% is what's required. And so we're actually cleaning the water more than what it was when it's hitting the ground today.
And they can always do more, of course.
You can always do more, but there is a maximum extent practical. Sometimes there's feasibility involved, but the 80% actually comes from that NPDES permit, something that DEQ required of the cities and counties in Oregon. And so we didn't make that number up. It came from the Department of
So
Environmental
it's kind of
Quality.
a minimum. You could do more. A person could do more.
Sure.
Good. It's always good. Any other questions?
well, I kind of wasn't done with mine. So, so assuming that there's a major storm event, and their holding pond fills rapidly, and then as typically the case, when they hit a certain level, then they start discharging. What would the most likely discharge source be for there? Would it be into our stormwater system, or would it be an overflow into the Mill Creek?
So that's all based on the design that they provide at the time.
Okay.
And so
Can we
I
require it to be into our stormwater system versus the creek?
we have various standards on, and Oregon drainage law states that any water that was going in a certain direction at one point has to continue to go in that direction. So, if it were to go towards Newell Creek now, it needs to continue to go to Newell Creek. If it doesn't go that way now, it needs to go the way it was going. They're not allowed to divert that water because that's drainage law. That basically says you have to send the water where it once went.
Well, and I understand the purpose of that, it's so that you don't dry up the people downstream of you. I mean, I'm a farmer, I understand about irrigation and valves and all that fun stuff, but so potentially they'd have a drainage pond. It floods in some crazy 1996 like flooding event.
Mm-hmm.
All that sediment that's been, precipitated out could conceivably just rise up and head off down Newell Creek, as opposed to the current standard, which would be, it's kind of scattered all over that property, and some of it might rise up, but, the topsoil and what's infiltrated into the soil wouldn't necessarily lift up and float away. So,
So stormwater standards are created within all cities, but specifically our city, to take care of the storms that are typical. Typically, stormwater standards are not there for the
96 level
yeah,
events.
the extreme events, and that's to create practicality. However, because of those standards that we have, which are extremely stringent in their own right, a lot of that stuff will actually happen. So because of the way it's designed, a lot of those sediments will fall out, the pollutants will fall out, even in the tremendous storms.
Mm-hmm.
In an extreme storm of godlike proportion, will some of it go downstream? Sure, but same thing would happen today if it hit the grass that's there now. It's all gonna fill up and it's not gonna infiltrate anymore, and something is gonna go that way today too. And so we're just
That's why
trying.
There's a creek there, because
That's right,
water ran off.
yeah.
Have you visited the site?
I've only driven by it myself. I have not visited the actual
Right,
site.
then I'll save my next question for the,
So what you're saying is that we're prepared to get it off the site in a controlled manner, get it to Newell Creek, where it will proceed downstream without any effect of the water quality.
Correct. Whether this is residential, whether it's mixed use, the standards we have in place would ensure either way the same exact requirements of water quality and water quantity.
So Kerry, that's into the record because of his testimony. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay, so we can take what he said as fact.
I would, in conjunction with the city engineer, Ms. Roman Goodrich submitted some testimony. The applicant has an engineer here. There
And
may
the
be other
manual.
engineers here, I don't know, but that would be the type and quality of evidence that I would weigh.
Well, I commend you on your technical explanation of the issue. Me not being a engineer. I'm just Irish, and I have a tough time understanding things. Okay? Thank you.
Any other questions of the commissioners? Okay. We are going to open the public hearing, and I would remind all of our folks tonight that we are going to be mindful of time. And if you come up and say something that somebody else has already said and you agree with it, you can just tell us that you agree, and that sounds great, and you'll still be on the record. Okay. Okay. Michael and Dan.
Or you change the order just a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry, no, you can't change the order. His card was on top, so sorry, you don't get to talk.
No problem. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission, Dan Fowler. It's been a little bit of a journey, but we're glad to be back. I looked at that number up there of 2015 and thought, wow, it surprised me even. You've heard it's already a narrow decision. I'm not going to get into that. I just want to introduce my business partner, Mark Foley, is here. Tom Sissel to my right from Sissel Engineering. And Mike Robinson will be taking my place in just a moment with Schwabe, Williams, and Wyatt. We will not affect Newell Creek with any development. This is a zone change hearing, however, so there's no specific plans as of yet. And that'll be talked about a little more than what I'm saying now. So I know, Tom, you're going to address some of the issues there. I'm going to step back and let Mike come up for the sake of time, and we'll move on. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, I want to point out that what we're talking about here is the difference between the existing zoning as it exists today, the residential zones, and,
You need to state your name.
oh, I'm sorry.
He was introduced, that's.
Tom Sissel. Okay, and between the existing zonings that exist today, the residential uses, residential zones, and the MU zoning, and the drainage requirements for the city of Oregon City do not draw any distinction on what the zoning is or what the use is. The standards that are spelled out in this manual, which is nearly 250 pages, is the same regardless of what you developed your land to. You have to meet specific standards. You have specific methodologies you must use to meet those standards. And you know, whatever may develop on the site, it's got to meet those specific standards, both in terms of water quality and water quantity. And I guess that's the point that I really wish to get across. We can get into the technical details about what storm events we're dealing with and those type of things, but they're the same for both types of uses and any other uses that might occur in the city of Oregon City, industrial or so forth. So that's what I really wanted to point out for clarity on this.
So the manual isn't divided into residential, industrial, commercial?
That's correct.
But it's a function of pervious pavement, right?
There
So an R6 allows less pervious pavement than the MUC zone, so you'd have a lot more of an allowance of pervious pavement, right?
That's correct. You're going to have, the more impervious surfacing you have, the larger facility you're going to have to deal with that stormwater runoff. And there's different types of stormwater facilities. I mean, you've probably now seen the little planter strips in parking lots or alongside roads. There's green roofs that are being used in some areas. There's a different number of types of planters in your types of facilities, and your stormwater book and through what they call the BMP tool that is its preferred method allows for these different types of facilities in terms of design.
Yeah, it's a little bit of irony here, because obviously many of us know that site has not been used residentially for a long time, so we're kind of comparing something that really doesn't currently exist on the site. I mean, it's been a bus barn for how many years, which has a lot of pavement on it and a lot of vehicles
Gravel.
with gasoline and whatever else they're using over there, so,
It could only get better.
yeah, well, obviously it can only get better, but obviously the analysis has only been done on residential versus MUC, as opposed to this use which is there, which is a conditional use. At least it is in our zone. I don't know if it was a conditional use in the county, but it's kind of, we really are not comparing apples to apples or fruit to fruit. We're comparing something out over here that didn't exist with something that still doesn't exist over here. See what I'm saying?
Yes. But this is in terms, I think this whole request is in terms of what could potentially
Yeah,
occur on
oh,
the property.
I understand that, but to say that, it's not gonna do X under residential use, it's not a residential use and hasn't been, I don't, but other people have lived here longer than I have.
Parts of it are residential.
Yes, one very small minuscule part, yeah.
Are you finished, Tom?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Chair McGriff, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Michael Robinson. I'm an attorney on behalf of the applicant. My mailing address is 1211 Southwest Fifth Avenue, Suite 1900, Portland 97204, and I did not give my old address, so I'm happy about that tonight. Chair McGriff, I see I have about 9.5 minutes. Do I get maybe an extra minute for questioning? Would that be permissible?
See,
Okay, well, let me know before you turn me off.
all right.
So we agree with the staff report. We agree with the recommendation that you recommend approval to the city commission that the comprehensive plan map and zoning map be amended. Let me just note one thing. The reason that LUBA, I believe, required a comparison of what we're required to do here is compare the impacts of the uses that are allowed under the zone that's there now, primarily residential, and the uses that will be allowed under the MUC zone. And I think Chair McGriff, you raised a good point about the bus barn. Bus barn is going to go away.
Yes.
So LUBA is correct. You have to look at what the zone allows, because I don't think we're going to get another bus barn. So that's really what you're, and I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job. I'm just putting it this way. That's really what your task is. So let me do two things before I go into my presentation that talks about evidence. I want to read a couple of passages from the LUBA opinion. It's, I think, well, it's in your packet. But at page 18, LUBA says what the petitioner, the particular issues he raised with respect to Goal 5, and he argued that commercial higher density uses made possible by the new map designations will result in an increased volume and velocity of stormwater, and that the stormwater will have increased levels of contaminants. So that's the issue he raised in his petition for review. And by the way, I should mention, this has had, beyond you, 4 levels of review. The brief to LUBA had, I think, 17 or 18 assignments and sub-assignments of error. LUBA's opinion was 70 pages long. It came back on this single issue. This was the only single issue, this LUBA faulted the city on. Court of Appeals did not change LUBA's opinion, and the Supreme Court said, we don't want to hear it. So that's how it got back to you. So what LUBA said we have to do on Goal 5 is determine whether some of the uses allowed under the MUC zone would conflict with Newell Creek, which is our only identified Goal 5 resource. If you determine that, in LUBA's words, the existing program is sufficient to prevent those conflicts, then Goal 5 technically does not even apply. But if you determine that that's not the case, then you need an additional environment, social, energy, and economic analysis, ESE. So we've submitted evidence from both prongs. We believe, and as does your city engineer, that your existing program is sufficient to protect Newell Creek from the more commercial dense uses that occur with the MUC zone. But even if that weren't the case, we asked Ms. Stacy Reed with AKS Engineering and Forestry to submit an ESE analysis. That's part of the record before you, and she concluded that the new uses allowed in the MUC zone would not conflict with Goal 5, the Goal 5 resource. So Commissioners Mahoney and maybe ask questions about the impact of erosion and pollutants. Let me read you a couple of excerpts from the April 25th, 2018 memorandum from Alita Froman Godrich with your Public Works Department. This is, I think, Exhibit 8 in your materials. So first on pollutants, this is page 3 of 3 from her report. Quote, the evaluation of the city's consultant concluded that the city has sufficient controls in place to address the pollutants of concern, end quote. In other words, the city had Brown and Caldwell take a look at their water quality program and determine whether certain pollutants could be a problem for water quality, and they concluded that that was not the case. The second thing that Ms. Froman Goodrich looked at was erosion, and she's describing the city's program for erosion control, which is implemented through Oregon City Municipal Code Chapter 1312. She says on page 2, quote, the aim is to prevent any further erosion caused from development to occur in streams, including Newell Creek, end quote. That's essentially what Joshua told you tonight. So you have programs embedded in your code, you have the stormwater manual, you have compliance with metro, state, federal requirements, all to assure water quality, which benefits the public. And frankly, we have as much interest in seeing that happen as everyone else. We don't want to be the ones that people would point a finger to and say, you damaged Newell Creek. But the point is, and I think Chair McGriff would agree with this, You don't just trust developers to do the right thing, you enact a code to see that they must do the right thing, and that's what the program does. So I apologize for taking so long on those few preliminary matters, but I just wanted to go through them. So let me just tell you the things that the evidence before you that can assure you that neither velocity of stormwater nor erosion nor increase in pollutants will emanate from the MUC uses in a way that will conflict with the Goal 5 use. And that's what LUBA wants us to look at. First of all, I just noted in a couple of your policies in your comprehensive plan, both at page 35, the plan notes that the Public Works stormwater and grading design standards adopted in 1999 achieve Goal 5 protection. The plan calls for protection of vegetation, reduced pulse runoff, and maintaining water quality and quantity, and that's what all of your programs that implement the plan do. Secondly, there are a number of pieces of evidence, really four, that we would ask you to look to support a conclusion that there's not conflicting uses with the Goal 5 resource. The first piece of evidence I've already noted for you is the April 25th, 2018 memorandum from your Public Works Department. That report essentially says that the stormwater program under the MPDS permit will maintain water quality through control of erosion and pollutants. The second was actually second and third items, both from Mr. Sissel, an April 16th, 2018 memorandum where he describes the MS4 permit, and a May 14th, 2018 letter where he gave you examples, and I think he referred to them tonight, of stormwater facilities that implement those city standards. And then, go past that. As I said earlier, in the event you believed that an SE analysis was also needed, we asked Ms. Reed to take a look at that. She prepared an SE analysis that's before you in a May 30th, 2018 memorandum. And by the way, Mr. Nocita submitted argument and maybe evidence on the 14th, the continued hearing date. I submitted a June 4th letter that responded to that. If you've not read the letter and you have an opportunity to do so before you conclude tonight, most of that argument, in my view, was form over substance with respect to substantive legal issues. He didn't take issue with the substantial evidence that we've submitted to you, and I note in his latest submittal, which I got it after 5 o'clock tonight, that there's still really no response to the substantial evidence in the whole record. So I wanted to summarize this by saying that our task always, and I think Laura did a nice job of explaining this, is to meet our burden of proof, to give you substantial evidence that you can rely upon to show that the criteria are met. In this case, unlike most of your hearings where you have a lot of criteria to choose from, you've got a single issue. Is there a conflicting use with Goal 5? The evidence before you demonstrates that in fact there's not. But even if you felt that there was, you have an SE analysis from a reputable scientist that tells you that there won't be a conflicting use with Goal 5. So the evidence before you shows that you have a credible and effective program. Metro recognizes you're in compliance with their water quality programs. You have a permit that's regulated by the state and federal governments. You're in compliance with that. And there are at least 2 chapters in the Oregon City Municipal Code. There are actually more, but there are 2. There's 13.12 and 17.49 that will ensure that this site, when it develops, will protect water quality. And I think you would agree that we will have to have decent and sufficient water quality facilities to make sure that we don't reduce the quality of Mule Creek. And I agree with you, Commissioner, maybe if we certainly have to maintain whatever that baseline is, but if we can do a better job and improve the water quality, we should all strive for that. And so that's what your program requires. Let me see, I've got a minute and 6 seconds, maybe more. Let me just mention 2 other things to you. Well, let me do this if I could, and I could probably do this in 30 seconds, Chair McGriff. So I'm looking at Mr. Nocita's email dated today to Ms. Turway and Ms. Richter. Let me just, and I don't know if you've even had a chance to look at it, let me just make a couple of points. Issues such as Goal 1 and Goal 2, those weren't preserved below. This is not an opportunity to raise new issues. We're subject to what's called the law of the case doctrine. So only issues that were preserved and not affirmed are back before us. And that's why, as Laura and Carrie told you earlier tonight, we're dealing with fairly narrow issues. This is not an occasion to call for an inventory of wildlife in Newell Creek that was not preserved below. That's why I read you at the very beginning what the petitioner was concerned about. And it didn't have to do with wildlife. And so we can't expand the scope of the remand at this point. The other thing I would say is I think the staff memorandum and the other staff evidence in the record are sufficient to demonstrate to you that many of the issues raised in this email are thoroughly addressed by the requirements they will impose on the applicant. I'm right at 0. I thank you for your time. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them, as would Mr. Sissel and Mr. Fowler.
Any questions? Okay.
Thank you,
Super.
Chairman Griffin.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Whoever says thank you to me.
I said thanks.
We said thanks.
Oh, I
I
was
did.
looking for a mic.
I said,
You did.
He said Mike, and I said thank you. I just followed up on that.
I'll try to take my hurt feelings and just.
All right. All right, next we have Jim Nocita.
Thank you, Jim Nocita, Oregon City. Mr. Robinson made reference to my comments. Did you all receive that? Yes. Okay, perfect. So I'll
But before we start the time, I want to go through the materials you submitted into the record. We received a Dropbox link. You want to submit into the record. We received a Dropbox link from you at 3:58 containing 8 documents. I'm going to ask you, because this is a limited hearing, I'm going to ask you to explain, the planning commission hasn't read any of these. I want you to have an opportunity to explain why these particular documents are germane to the limited issue on remand, which is this question of conflicts and new uses.
Okay.
To Newell Creek. So if you could explain that, we'll go through each one. The first one is article on the EC and Goal 5. This is a Steve Abel and John Volkman.
I did want to clarify something, though, because I don't think I agree with what Mr. Robbins said about the analysis. Luba's decision, and I can read it for you, said that the first thing that the commission has to do is to identify whether conflicting use could impact the Goal 5 resource. If it could impact the Goal 5 resource, then you have to go through the Goal 5 process, EEC, whatever that acronym is.
Yes.
Analysis is, and the Goal 5 rule has, a whole litany of what you have to do to comply with that. Okay? So there's both a factual question here and then a policy question here. So obviously, if you don't find any impacts, you don't have to go to the policy. You're good. But if you do find that, there could be impacts, then you have to go through that policy. I'm arguing that there are impacts, so I'm also arguing that you have to go through the ESEE analysis, and there are policy issues when you go through an ESEE analysis. Okay? Now, in the documents I've submitted, if you don't find a conflicting use, you're not really going to need a lot of what I put in. So I added items
So
to the extent that they are relevant to the ESEE analysis, should you, reach that point.
Which of these documents is an EC analysis?
No, I'm saying they're documents that are relevant to the ESEE analysis.
Okay, so,
And I have a list, I'll go through it with you.
okay.
So the first one is an article on ESAA and Goal 5.
It's the Endangered Species Act,
Yeah.
And Goal 5?
Yeah.
and that's relevant to the EC analysis. Why?
Well, for example, in the ESEE analysis, you have to coordinate with agencies like Fish and Wildlife on issues like the Endangered Species Act, because Newell Creek has salmonids in it.
And you raised the idea of your concern about impacts to wildlife at during the proceeding before? You raised issues related to, let me read it. Commercial high-density uses made possible by the MAP designation will result in increased volume and velocity of stormwater, and that stormwater will have increased levels of contaminants.
That's where it's relevant.
Did you raise wildlife impacts from contaminants?
Well, it's inherent that increased contaminants are going to impact wildlife.
We're looking at a limited issue on remand.
Yeah.
We're not reevaluating the condition of Newell Creek.
I
So-
can say what contaminants will go into Newell Creek. Okay?
And this
if-
EC and Goal 5 analysis by Stephen Abel, who I
Yes.
believe is a lawyer,
Yes.
is going to provide expert testimony on what contaminants are going into Newell Creek.
No, see, again, I think, I have to read what Luba said, because I don't think
You need to point out where in the materials that you've submitted, you are what in the materials you submitted, you're relying on for the limited question that is at issue. That's what I'm trying to understand. Your email that you submitted with these materials did not quote to any particular part of these 8 documents that you have submitted. So I'm trying to understand what you are submitting these for, so that I can determine if they're within the scope of the remand or
Sure.
not.
Let me read, if I may, Chair, what Luba said, because I think I'm disagreeing with how this is being characterized by the city attorney and the appellant. Beginning on page 17, OAR 660-023-025 subsection 3B requires that the city conduct an initial inquiry to determine whether new uses allowed under the PAPA could conflict with Goal 5 resources. Only if the answer to the question is no, may the city conclude that Goal 5 does not apply. As part of that initial inquiry, the city could consider whether the city's existing program to protect the inventoried resources from the lower density residential development allowed under the prior map designation is also adequate to ensure that new, more intensive uses will not conflict with the protected resources. If a finding to that effect, supported by substantial evidence, can be made, then no further inquiry is needed. However, if the city's initial inquiry cannot eliminate the possibility of conflicts from the new uses allowed by the new map designations, and here's the important part, the city must repeat any of the steps in the Goal 5 planning process that are necessary to ensure that the city's Goal 5 obligations with respect to protected resources continue to be met. That last clause is not a factual evidence directive. It is a policy and decision and programmatic directive. So I understand what the city attorney is trying to tell me, and what the city attorney is trying to tell this commission is that I am limited to submitting evidence on contaminants, but I am not allowed to discuss what the policy implications of that pollution from contaminants is. And I disagree with that. Goal 5, we should probably have you review what the Goal 5 rule is, because that hasn't come up from any of what you've been presented to from staff or from the applicant. Goal 5 is very complex, and that's what you guys need to know, how that works to make your decision in a just and effective way. And then that discussion's not happening right now.
Okay, let's move on. I'm going to move on through these materials quickly because I think we need to move on with the hearing. But you have stated that you've submitted this EC and Goal 5 analysis to show, this ESA and Goal 5 analysis to show some legal argument with regard to what an EC requires.
Yes.
So I would say we would admit that for that purpose. Then document number 2 is the Oregon City MS4 permit. That document is already in the record. It was included in the applicant's material. Document number 3 is the Oregon City NPDES 2016 and 2017 annual report. I would ask you to explain why you have submitted this.
Sure, because it explains monitoring and explains what kind of pollutants are being discharged into the creeks of Oregon City.
Okay, I would admit that document for that purpose. Cascade Environmental Group, Clackamas.
You got the DEQ.
Missed the DEQ.
Oh, excuse me, Oregon DEQ of DEQ State Agency Coordination Program document
Right.
from 1991.
Right, so a lot of the issues with water quality relate to, the Oregon Department, with water quality standards and issues relate to, the governance by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and their policy documents are obviously pertinent to, agency coordination and things like that. Now, on the Cascade Environmental Group.
So
Sure.
let's, before we move on, I'm not convinced that this DEQ analysis has anything specific to do with the EC analysis or the water quality issue with regard to an MUC zoning. I would recommend that the planning commission not consider this document.
Again, if I
Moving
may-
on to number
No,
5.
I have a right to speak on this. I don't know if you've read the whole state agency coordination program, but how it handles things like water quality standards is really relevant to, how these issues are handled, especially since the MS4 permit is in fact a DEQ issued permit. So that's.
Okay.
But if the permit was issued, doesn't that mean that we're complying with the policy? So is the policy relevant if we've got a permit that says we comply?
Well, I don't think that's the only issue because the state agency has responsibilities under, I think it's ORS 197-180, and includes goal compliance. So if you don't have any evidence that DEQ in the process of issuing an MS4 permit went through findings on how the MS4 permit complies with the goals, then Goal 5 might still be unaddressed.
Isn't the MPS permit specifically because of Goal 5?
No, not at all. MS4 permits are NPDES permits that are issued under the Clean Water Act. It's a federal law.
Right.
It doesn't have anything to do with Goal 5.
So we can discharge contaminants and still get a MPDS?
Yes, and that's kind of, Commissioner, maybe is part of the whole nub of what's going on here, and I'll tell you why. Because in
It's beyond the scope of-
1987, the Congress gave MS4 permits a free pass on compliance with water quality standards. Okay, and if water quality standards are crucial because like temperature is a water quality standards, okay? If scientifically you need cold water to support salmon and your NPDES permit says you don't have to comply with the temperature standards and water quality standards, then you don't have Goal 5 compliance because you're conflicting with the resource. So no, that's what the applicant's attorney is trying to argue. We got an MS4 permit, we're good for Goal 5. No, that's not the case because it's a flawed permit. It's a flawed permit as far as scientific needs of what habitat and animals and habitat require to thrive. It doesn't fill the bill.
Okay.
It just doesn't fill the bill. And Goal 5 is a different authority than the Clean Water Act. So just because you comply with the Clean Water Act does not mean you comply with Goal 5.
Okay.
All right?
Okay, we've got 4 more. Cascade Environmental Group, Clackamas Cove Water Quality Habitat Improvement Feasibility Study.
Okay, now on this one, the only reason obviously Newell Creek doesn't run into the cove. The only reason I added this on page 27 through 30 of that document, there's a discussion on how, it's a scientific discussion on how stormwater runoff from roads and parking lot, it's exactly what Commissioner Mahoney mentioned. That parking lot runoff contains a lot of toxics that harm like the nervous systems of salmon, okay? Now, again, Commissioner, they may be good on, the MS4 permit and discharging all that pollution, all right? But that doesn't mean that goal 5 is met. It's the science you have to depend on here as far as LUBA's remand. It's not whether you have a valid NPDES MS4 permit.
But I'm looking at page 29 of this report, and it talks about the cove and stormwater monitoring related to the cove. I'm having difficulty understanding how this is going to have any application to Newell Creek and a different property somewhere else.
Okay, if I may, let me open up that document again.
All the documents have also been uploaded to our website earlier this afternoon and then are on
Yeah, I
your
did
computers
look at
as
them.
well.
Yeah, well, I didn't have.
And I'm
time
sorry to
look
take
at
this time,
it.
it's
That's
that
okay.
we've had,
We need the time. We haven't gotten,
Better 10 minutes now than,
most of
10
us
days
have
of
not had an
testimony.
opportunity to even look at any of them.
Okay, look at, on page 29, the fourth paragraph says, roadways, parking lots, and other impervious surfaces, as well as landscape surfaces, can be the source of and accumulate a mixture of contaminants, including sediment, metals, copper, nickel, zinc, etc., petroleum-derived compounds from oil, grease, and vehicle exhaust, and other contaminants. During rainfall events, stormwater collects these contaminants and transports them to the cove, but they transport them to any other water body. Research by the National Marine Fisheries Service and others have shown that common stormwater contaminants can impair salmon and steel health in a variety of ways. For example, petroleum-derived compounds suppress the immune system, rendering fish more vulnerable to pathogens that cause lethal diseases. Now, there's your could impact right there. That's all you need to decide that you need an ESEE analysis for this project, because this demonstrates scientifically that stormwater runoff, especially from more imperviousness in a dense development, could impact Goal 5 resources. I mean, that's the decision right there.
okay, so we
For
will,
example, certain metals are toxic to the salmon nervous system, thereby disrupting feeding and predator avoidance. Dissolved copper is a particularly pervasive contaminant in stormwater that threatens salmon and steelhead survival. So, I mean, that's why I added this to the record. I think
okay,
it's
so we will
perfectly
add,
relevant.
we will add the one paragraph that starts at the bottom of page 29, goes to the top of page 30, and the cover page of the Clackamas Cove Water Quality Habitat Improvement Feasibility Study.
I don't-
Number 6 is, that's my recommendation.
I've got a question.
Yeah,
Mr. Nocita,
Yes, sir.
when an applicant appears before us for a zone change, it's common knowledge that the burden of proof is with them
That's
to
correct.
determine the need and whatever. And they supply us certain information, okay? In your judgment, does the same rule apply to yourself in supplying scientific evidence to us to back up where you think that we haven't performed adequately in the review of Goal 5? I mean, where's your evidence?
I
mean,
just
you're
read
making-
some of, I
you're
just
making
read some of the. yeah.
accusations here.
I read some of the evidence. They're not accusations. I'm just stating what I think what the Goal 5 requires. I don't think that I have the same burden that the applicant has. And secondly, the could standard in Goal 5 it's not a high threshold. It's not. Where the threshold I think would be high would be in the actual ESEE analysis. that you have to. It's a low threshold to require an ESE analysis, but when you get to the nitty-gritty, it's in the ESE analysis where that has to happen, and the implementation program as a result of the ESE analysis. Oregon City TMDL implementation plan affects Newell Creek. There's specific policy recommendations regarding shading in that implementation
Do
plan.
you want to direct the planning commission where those pages are?
Yes. Okay. Again, I'll have to open up.
And your position is that the city's TMDL implementation plan is not implemented in the grading and stormwater standards?
Yes, I actually don't know where it's implemented in the whole land use system. If the TMDL requires not just habitat cover, but specific shade trees to prevent sunlight beating down on Newell Creek as it flows through the property, I think that's a Goal 5 issue. I don't know, I don't think that 1749 requires that. It's a whole, it's, like I said, it's a different.
Okay, what page?
Hold on a second. Well, it's a number of pages. I mean, I don't think you can understand what the specific recommendation for Newell Creek is without understanding the whole TMDL process.
But
Okay, I'll let you present your argument with regard to this, and then we'll see what you want to do.
Well, I guess my question is how does that differentiate, how would that change our impact based on the code change? I mean, it's either true for the residential zoning, you know,
You're saying it would have to
but
be a
the issue
standard,
is,
right?
that was remanded back to us is,
Sure.
does the change from residential to MUC, has that been properly addressed as a Goal 5? So my question is, does this document give us information that says, because it's MUC and not our residential, there's an issue? It sounds to me like you're saying the document itself says, even as residential, there's an issue.
Yes, but I could, I think you could look at it this way too. I will be arguing that increase imperviousness is going to increase temperature, and as part of the policy implementation of, the Goal 5 for this particular site, if you don't already have to, as part of 1749, provide the shading that the TMDL requires, and there's no other mechanism to do that than to moderate that additional increase in temperature from stormwater runoff. Shading can be part of that mix.
But wouldn't that same shading be required in the residential as it is under MUC?
Not necessarily, because if you have to comply with the standards as they are if the applicant tried to develop this property as residential, that's not a zone change.
I understand.
Okay, so there would be no mechanism, if 1749 doesn't require it, there would be no mechanism to require that shading. Because when you do a zone change, you can add conditions of approval.
I understand that.
And as part of the ESE program, you can require a condition of approval that the developer make those shade plantings as part of your Goal 5 implementation. And I'm not sure you would have that authority to do that if the developer just developed under the residential code as it stands already on this property. Okay, the whole,
We have testimony from our staff that says those solutions will apply in our stormwater catch basins and things of that nature, and will not affect these creeks, these waterways.
well, I think, I don't think the stormwater management plan or the design manual requires the shading that the Clean Water Act through the TMDL plan does require. My whole argument, Commissioner Mahoney, about this application and about Oregon City's rules and regulations.
Okay, we're getting into a little bit more
Okay,
field.
well, I was asked a question.
We need to get
I
back
was asked
on-
the question, I was
Yeah.
just trying to answer the question.
I understand.
But I think the core of this hearing is that Oregon City's regulations that are based solely on an MS4, in large part on the MS4 permit, they're not satisfactory for Goal 5. They're just not.
So
Okay, so,
Oregon City,
before you go on, just for the audience, people don't probably know what a TMDL is, so it's total maximum daily load. It's a requirement document that is loads that are set by the Department of Environmental Quality, and that's all I'm going to say about it, just because not everybody in the world knows what that is.
so just to answer the city attorney's question, figure 3-2H in the TMDL plan shows the requirement for shading along the stretch of Newell Creek that is in this development.
okay.
Okay.
Item 7, Metro Newell Creek Canyon Master Plan. Newell
Yes.
Creek Canyon Access Master Plan.
Yes, both of those documents have discussions regarding the similar issues regarding what the habitat and Goal 5 resources are in Newell Creek, especially the conservation plan. But there's a shorter discussion in the master plan. And some of the information that's in the Metro EC analysis is similar regarding the effects of stormwater pollution on salmonids and other types of habitat, and especially toxics.
And just, well, I'll let you testify, and then I'll ask
Okay,
you a question,
sure.
sorry.
That's all right.
We're still not in testimony.
I know, that's fine.
Okay, my recommendation would be that we admit items 1, 3, a portion, page 29 to 30, that one paragraph, 5, 7, and 8.
1, 2 as well.
Two's already in.
2's already in.
So are you saying you don't agree with the
We-
TMDL?
What? No, so the TMDL would stay out, and, because it has nothing to do with Goal 5. And the DEQ State Agency Coordination Program document would stay out, and lion's share of the Clackamas Cove Water Quality Feasibility Study would stay out.
Well, I disagree with the TMDL document.
Okay,
It's all about water quality,
okay,
so. But I'm okay with the other paragraph, and, that's fine.
so it sounds like we have, I mean, if somebody disagrees and they want to talk further about it, let's do that before the record closes, so that
What about what would you say about the last one?
those two I would let in, assuming that they talk about the quality of Newell Creek. I want to reiterate again, though, I urge the planning commission to keep in mind that this is not about the quality of Newell Creek.
Right.
I mean, this is about, we have already a program to protect Newell Creek. And whether or not there is substantial evidence to show that that program will be sufficient. And that's really the first question. And when Mr. Nocita read the sort of Luba decision, that's the first question. And so I think a lot of this goes beyond the question, the limited issue before Luba. So I just want to advise the planning commission about that.
Well, so if it does go beyond, why are we introducing it into the record?
Because it does have value for, at the very least, those portions of Newell Creek in the subject property.
It does, Carrie?
Well, I don't know. I haven't read it. And that's the difficulty, is that we have a testifier here who's bringing in multiple pages and not directing us to where the evidence is that makes their case showing that the criteria aren't satisfied. And so I'm sort of at a lot, I'm trying to help the process by trying to narrow the issues as best I can based on what I understand about them. And
Well, that in and of itself doesn't expand the process to address an issue that we've been advised is limited in and of itself. I think we're getting way beyond what we were directed to do by Luba.
I appreciate that, and I guess I would err on the side of caution and accept as many things as we can identify, as we can. I mean, I can't advise you that the evidence related to Clackamas Cove is gonna be germane to this inquiry.
I'm sort of narrowing it down even further to look at the materials that are leaving the site and the quality of those materials that are leaving the site, whether or not the city's stormwater manual and other things are adequate to address the mitigation of those to pre-development conditions.
That's the question.
Is that, okay.
That's the question. I can't tell you whether or not this document has anything to do with that.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, we don't either because we haven't had a chance
And
to read it.
I'm trying to help facilitate that, and I'm trying to let things in so we can move the process along, because if things aren't relevant, then it doesn't hurt to have them in. But on the other hand,
It also clouds the issue.
it does, and it makes the record cumbersome, and it makes things
It makes planning
complicated.
commissioners grouchy because then they have to read stuff that isn't relevant to the application, which is, we have a lot of work to do, and I have no problem reading things, but I do not like getting stuff at the last minute.
I'd like to, if I may ask Commissioner Espy a question. Would you agree that parking lots that discharge into the cove contain things like dissolved copper and brake pad, and that a parking lot that discharges into the cove is going to have the same constituents as the parking lot that discharges into Newell Creek? I mean, a parking lot's a parking lot, no matter what watershed it's in.
We don't have the specific expertise to make that determination. I mean, we can.
And it really depends on what kind of systems are
there.
in place
We
to
could speculate,
take those
but
elements out and all that other kind of stuff. It's an impossible question.
how relevant is our opinion? We're not those people. We can't.
The question is, so what? What's that got to do with?
Well, it's not a so what, it's just we
No,
don't.
I'm responding to.
It's
Mr.
very
Cedar.
broad. We just don't have the expertise. I mean, I could give you my personal opinion about what I think is going in there, but that's not relevant,
Well, that's
because
what I'm saying, it's not relevant.
it's not relevant to what I think about what parking lot pollutants are going in there or not.
It is, it's relevant to the
Can I-
could
can I
analysis.
bring-
I have a pretty clear idea on how to look at it.
Okay, so I've heard Commissioner Maybe say that he would like item 6 in. I'm fine with that, so I would say 1, 3, one paragraph of item 5, 6, 7, and 8.
I think we should ask the rest of the commission what they think about it. I appreciate your opinion, Damon. So you're talking about the Oregon City,
TMDL.
okay, just, these aren't numbered, so I mean, I'm having to go back and number them myself.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion on, if you number the bullet points, number 6, is it your opinion it should be in there, or Damon's asking for it to be in?
I mean, again, we're looking at mitigation to Newell Creek Canyon, and when we're talking about these TMDLs, we're talking about the quality of Newell Creek, which we're not supposed to be doing. We can't require the applicant to shade Newell Creek when they're doing they have to treat the stormwater on the site pre-development conditions.
So,
And I don't believe that includes, I'm sorry, I don't believe that includes, providing shading for Newell Creek and addressing the TMDL issues downstream.
But it does. I mean, it's exactly like the intersection that's downstream. It's just like the pump station that's downstream. If something that the person does impacts something downstream, he's responsible for mitigating or dealing with it. And so if he can plant enough trees on his property to cool the water down to the way it is now, great. But if he needs another 25 feet of shading,
But
then he needs to.
The way the
plant it.
rules are is that he has to take care of the stormwater leaving his site.
Well, and this
Right,
is-
but if he can't cool it down on his site,
Yeah.
then, and what he needs is
True.
12 more trees down the hill, then that's what he does. Just like if he can't, the pump station downstream can't handle the flow he's providing, he has to upgrade the pump station. It's the same thing.
This is why I've come to appreciate this lovely flow chart, because,
Yes.
Yeah,
And we're talking about a lot of stuff and we haven't answered question one,
Yeah.
which make this entire conversation irrelevant.
Right.
I understand.
yeah, I would,
So-
yeah, I would agree.
But it's good that we've got the information, so if we do we do need to go past question one, and we've got it, and we understand why we've got it.
Damon, where do you stop?
Well-
How far down Mill Creek do we go? That makes it a responsibility of the applicant versus a public responsibility.
If you can.
Well, that's the question we've got about traffic. How many intersections do we require them to mitigate through before it's not their problem, it's the general flow of everything? Remember, if you look at this as not water, but traffic,
It's something that's moving.
yeah, it's,
But everybody contributes to it, not just the applicant, everybody.
right.
Zach, you had something you wanted to add in?
that was basically it, is we're stuck on the one question. I think we're kind of sliding into if not, and what that process is. For sake of this discussion and just for expediency's sake, Damien wants it, I'm fine to oblige him, but I kind of agree, with Bob and Paul that, we should focus on the site. But I don't think it's a big deal to let it in.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure everybody is in agreement if we are going to be adding something. So if you're okay with it, then we're okay with Vern.
Based on,
Yeah, I think we're
Not really
we're
knowing.
getting so far off the track and into questions that each of us have a little bit different understanding. And I think I would admit that starting on this end, I'm not an engineer in any of this and not a legal on any of these. We have to, well, I would say for myself, I have to look at the two attorneys, applicant and city, and the technical resources from the applicant and the city are, they didn't just fall off the turnip truck. They've been around the block. They know what's going on. I just think we're so close to it that we just need to say, as our attorney is saying, let's allow some of this stuff in there just to complete the process and
Okay,
move
Just so
on
you
and
understand,
get
I'm
it
not
to
arguing
deliberation.
against what in or out. I'm just saying, I want to make sure we have a consensus so that if we are allowing something in, we all are on the same page, which apparently it sounds like we are. So I'm good with that. I'm just trying to keep the water clear, so to speak, over on our end and not make it muddy.
what's next?
Chair McGriff, I have a procedural issue to raise for you, if you'll hear me. Mike Robinson on behalf of the applicant. I don't object to the commission allowing the documents in that they've just discussed. But what I will tell you is I think you should limit the issues to those that Mr. Nacita preserved. I hear, and I'll talk more about this in rebuttal, but much of what he wants to tell you tonight, ask him why he couldn't have raised that 2 years ago. So if you wanted to make all of these arguments, this is the second time the folks that are interested in this application have been in front of you. There was no prohibition the first time around. You could have even raised issues like this at the city commission without new evidence. So all I'm saying is if you allow this evidence in, it's your choice. I'm not going to object to it. But I think a further filter on this ought to be issues that could have been raised before but were not preserved, and you shouldn't consider them further. And I think virtually everything he wants to raise tonight, weigh it against the simple question, could it have been raised? And if it wasn't, why wasn't it? And that, in my view, would compel you find that it's waived and not to be further considered.
Well, to be honest with you, Mike, it was the question I had written down to ask our city attorney.
Thank you. But in the interim, Mr. Nocita still has yet to testify.
Okay, so I'm going to rely on what I have written, because I don't think it's that long, and I think it's something you can, you may have already read and can digest. I want to talk about a couple of issues that weren't in my 5 o'clock submittal. First of all, as far as, the downstream
Excuse me just a
impacts.
second. Where are we going with this?
Where are we going with what?
Well, he said he wants to raise some issues that were not in his 4:45, 4:58 PM submittal.
Well, they
The
ought to
record's
be
open.
limited
The
to
record's
the
open.
issue. They ought to be limited to the narrow scope of what we're doing here today that I've restated about 16 times, I feel like. And, we're not going beyond that scope. And I can't say it any more clearly.
Okay, well, would you be to help me with that, please?
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Please proceed.
So regarding the downstream impacts off-site, in the Goal 5 rule, 660-23040 states in part, the SEE analysis must consider any applicable statewide goal or acknowledged plan requirements. And we have, I think, a pertinent comprehensive plan requirement that kind of goes to what Commissioner Maybe was concerned about, and that's oh, shoot. Oh, 5.4.12, that says you have to take a watershed approach to these issues. And the watershed, you have to address the whole Newell Creek watershed, which would include downstream. So anyway, there's not a timer anywhere?
Yeah, it's right in front of you.
Okay. I want to go back, and already in the record, there's, from the first go-around, there is a geologic hazard paper by Hart Krauser, and it relates to the landslide hazard, but there's a significant water issue in here that relates to the CUD standards. And that is because there's a nearby landslide, they were afraid that infiltration would saturate the land and increase the risk of a landslide. And it said to mitigate this hazard,
Landslide?
just let me finish this. To mitigate the landslide hazard, potential sources of water infiltration will be controlled largely by relying on stormwater detention rather than infiltration. So they are recommending as part of this that you don't infiltrate. And the problem with that is relates to the CUD standard is one of the critical ways you solve the temperature problem is infiltration, so the ground cools it. Now, if you're gonna increase imperviousness and add more pavement that heats the water and you can't infiltrate it, then you're gonna discharge it into Newell Creek. And because of that, it could impact the resource with higher water temperature. And I don't know of any of the BMPs in the stormwater management plan or the manual that addresses temperature. And the temperature issue is the critical one for salmon and habitat. Well, I'm out of time, so I'm just going to rely on my written comments for that. Thank you, unless you all have any questions.
When you say your written comments, you're referring to the email? Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure we have the right one.
Thank you.
Oh, well, I have a question for you though.
Sure. Wait.
That I was gonna wait. Is your contention that the Metro ESEE analysis is not sufficient?
Yes, because that's written on a 30,000-foot level, very generalized. And this is a very specific analysis here.
I just wanted to.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. William Spady, sir.
Do I push buttons or?
No, you
I
don't
just
have to do
talk?
it.
Oh,
You don't
hi.
have to do anything. Isn't that
Okay,
nice?
whoa.
Yeah, I know, it's very technical.
I'm here on behalf of my sister, who lives in Blue River, Oregon right now. She's been a resident of Oregon City and has spoken to the commission over 25 years ago on a continuing basis, I believe, about these issues. She's prepared a statement. I have copies that I will give to someone. I have 3 copies,
Is that
so
lovely person,
whoever
Laura?
they go to.
Laura.
So the perspective is, I'm going to say, historical. She has lived through development after development where promises and promises and promises were made about runoff and about storm and about everything else, and has witnessed one major, I'll call it catastrophe, after another of the fact that all of the things that were going to be provided for were not, in terms of drainage, in terms of stormwater, potential damage, et cetera, et cetera. Her own property is part of the canyon, and I want to keep my comments and her recommendations quite pertinent to Newell Creek itself and what she's recommending to you. You know, I think, a good deal of the history and the background of these issues, and I will only point out 2 or 3 things that as background to what's in her statement. Number 1, she's been incredibly involved with the effort that Clackamas Community College itself made to remediate, thank you, remediate stormwater damage, et cetera, at the very headwaters of Newell Creek. She's recommending that you visit that site, talk to a gentleman called Bob Corcoran, who knows all about its creation, its facility, the work that was done there, et cetera. The second thing she's recommending that you visit is the stormwater detention facility that's on the north side of Beaver Creek Road. Okay? Both of those are upstream of the site that you're considering. Then there's the site. And I'm new to this conversation, but as someone who has spent a lifetime as a research scientist, I am puzzled by all of this because I'm not clear what happens to stormwater. It sounds like it goes some magical places or it goes into Newell Creek. And if it goes into Newell Creek, given the intensity of development that has been up in this area, I don't see how such a small body of water can handle both the volume and the contaminants and the other kinds of things that have come from development. So maybe you know things about where stormwater goes that as a neophyte to the issue, I don't. But if it goes into Newell Creek, then I think a couple of her other recommendations here are extremely relevant. She is recommending in particular that you visit Metro's Newell Creek Enhancement Area and engage with Brian Vaughn from Metro. He will show you all of the work that Metro has been trying to do to preserve the creek, the quality of the creek, and all of the things that have affected that. She's also recommending that you visit Newell Ridge and see both the good news and the bad news of all of the things that have happened there. as well as the Forest Edge Apartments, and all of the damage that was done there. A final recommendation is to fully engage the city's Natural Resource Committee in assisting you in making this decision. They've been intensely involved in these kinds of issues, and she is asking that you solicit their written recommendations about this and the impact that it's going to have. So on behalf of her long involvement in these matters relating to this creek and the investment that she's made of her own time and resources, I thank you for the opportunity to address you. And I'd sure like to know where all that stormwater goes.
It's magic.
Yeah.
It's magic?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just goes away.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Except for the residue of all the
Right, that's
chemicals
just
and
the
stuff.
water goes away. You asked about the storm water, not about what it's got in it.
Oh, okay, that
He's
doesn't
being,
count.
he's being slightly facetious.
That doesn't count, I guess, right? Yeah, so
Thank you. Yes, we'll let her know. as
you're
well.
welcome.
Can we get a copy of this before we leave? I just glanced at it, but I'm gonna pass it down because I don't think they'll have time to read it. either.
I didn't catch who you were speaking for.
Shaw Spade.
Shaw Spady, my sister, she has property, major property, on the edge of the canyon in Oregon, just outside of the
Right
city
behind
boundary
the
of Oregon
Berkeley
City.
Hills Apartments. You go down to the dead end. That's
We're gonna need
Shaw's
enough
property.
Yeah, she's beyond the dead end.
Well, I know, but that's the best way to explain it to somebody who's
Yeah.
never been there. I've
That's
been
right.
there. So,
When the road stops,
yes,
she starts.
yes, when the road stops.
Okay, well,
Carrie, have you had a chance to take a look at that?
Looking at it quickly, I think it's, again, goes beyond the scope of the issue before us. I mean, we are not right now charged with reevaluating our water quality program with regard to Newell Creek. And I mean, I think that this is all important information for that endeavor. But right now, we're just looking at the regulations in place. I believe that the stormwater standards are fairly new, like 2015. So I'm not sure that sort of the city's past practices are germane to whether or not our current program is going to be adequate to preserve the water quality. So, those are my thoughts about this letter.
Yeah, well, I understand the point.
But I think.
as a researcher, I will comment that I began my whole career as a technical scientific one, and it has evolved over the past 50 years to being a qualitative one, where I ask very different kinds of questions now, where numbers don't have all the answers. And I think the issue of just further and further and further development is one of those kinds of questions that I have begun to ask, quite apart from the technical specifications of any recommendation or any, quote, scientific study. It's just how much farther you want development and its inevitable consequences to take you. So, thank you.
Good point. Thank you, we
Thank you.
appreciate it. Still getting information that it is still not working.
We have confirmation that it is working on other computers.
Not
So
on the city's TV channel, Willamette Falls TV channel. It's not it's broadcasting a city commission meeting from May 16th.
on the YouTube channel, is that what you're
Not
talking
on the, just on the regular
Yeah, it's not on
Channel 28 or whatever.
TV? So, yeah,
Willamette Falls.
sorry, there's you saw me walking around
Yeah, we have a-
earlier and.
We have
I was
some
talking-
constituents that are texting me saying, it's not working, I can't watch the meeting.
Yeah, I don't know about the TV station. I did get confirmation that there's been no interruptions in the YouTube channel.
Yeah,
and
the
so
YouTube channel
YouTube channel's working, and we do have confirmation that from other computers, our on-demand button is working from our website, which was the initial issue that was addressed.
Yeah. I'm sending that information back. Our public is very involved. They have my personal. All right, you ready to come on back up?
Yes.
Okay, super, thank you.
Chairman Griff, we understood Ms. Beatty's brother was going to testify, so we have a letter that contains argument only relating to the scope of the testimony that was placed in the record. With your permission, I'll hand it to Mr. White. So, Chairman Griff, we're going to let Tom go first, and then I'll conclude the applicant's rebuttal.
There was testimony about the impacts of the increase, what I took as increased traffic that might generate additional pollutants over residential use. But I want to remind the commission that in your original review of this, you agreed to a trip cap on this development, so that we should not have any increase in vehicles in the mixed-use commercial zoning over what would be allowed in the residential zoning. And then there was the concern expressed about the geotechnical hazards and possibly impacts that not allowing infiltration. Well, first of all, I'll make a note that whether it comes in as a subdivision or it comes in as a development that involves site review, the city engineering staff will require an updated geotechnical report, including infiltration rates and a recommendation from the geotechnical engineer that may be involved with that project. And all of those things will be reviewed, and the city's stormwater manual takes into account whether you can infiltrate or not. It still is to meet the standards of release per the stormwater manual. And finally, the last thing I'm going to add is whether you do it as a subdivision or you do it as site development, there's discretion allowed in regarding conditions of approval for such things as trees and shading and those type of things. So I want to express all those things, and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Tom. Chairman Griff, members of the commission, Mike Robinson on behalf of the applicant. So a couple of things at the outset. Let me go back and read to you, and this is the third time you've heard this. I apologize for the repetitive nature of this. But it's important to understand what LUBA said that this commission needs to do on remand. I'm not sure why Mr. Nocita thinks that we mischaracterized this, and I apologize if I said it the wrong way, but it's a two-step analysis. But as the slide said, you only get to the second step if you don't find the first step satisfactory, and here it is. As part of that initial inquiry, and I'm reading from pages 17 and 18 of the LUBA decision, the city could consider whether the city's existing program to protect the inventoried resources from the lower density residential development allowed under the prior map designations is also adequate to ensure that new, more intensive uses won't conflict with protected resources, Newell Creek. If a finding that effect supported by substantial evidence can be made, then no further inquiry is needed. The only reason we have an SE analysis in front of you is belt and suspenders, as people say. But I think you have substantial evidence before you showing that your program is more than satisfactory to protect Newell Creek. And I just want to read, never going to be able to find all this, there's too much stuff here, but let me just read two things to you. So this is the purpose statement in 1749010, the Natural Resource Overlay District. Quote, the NROD designation provides a framework for protection of Metro Titles 3 and 13 lands and statewide Planning Goal 5 resources within Oregon City. So that goes to the protection of Goal 5 resources. 13.12's purpose statement, which is 1312.010, has a number of purpose statements that it implements directly related to the issues Mr. Nocita raised. Among them, sub-C, reduce stormwater runoff rates and volume soil erosion and pollution wherever possible from developed and developing lands. And then sub-E, maintain the integrity of stream channels for their biological functions as well as for drainage and other purposes. You have two chapters from the municipal code that expressly go to Goal 5 and more specifically go to the very issues that Mr. Nocita alleges will be a conflicting use. But more importantly, the task is it's fairly narrow. And everything Mr. Nocita has alleged tonight, both orally and in writing, could occur with the existing residential uses. I mean, there's simply no dispute about that. You could have runoff that raises water temperature or carries pollutants or does other things under the existing zone as well as under the proposed zone. But the point Luba asked you to do is to compare those two zones and the uses and conclude, is there going to be an impact on the Goal 5 resource? And the answer I think you can come up with is there won't. You have an existing program that's more than satisfactory. The state has not told you you're not compliant with Goal 5. Metro says you're in compliance with Titles 3 and 13, which relate to water quality. You have federal and state laws. It's beyond me to understand how, if you're complying with more stringent requirements of higher level governments requiring water quality, you're not achieving Goal 5. And I think you are. And I think there are a number of programs that you are, that the city's using to satisfy Goal 5. That's why the substantial evidence before you lets you conclude that the existing program is satisfactory to show that the more intense commercial uses from the MUC zone will not conflict with Goal 5, and that means Goal 5 is not applicable. So this is just not an occasion to turn this into a scientific analysis. It's really a much more narrow analysis, and it's really, frankly, an analysis that lay people need to conduct. What's the impact on Newell Creek from the existing zone versus what's the impact from the proposed zone? And with that in mind, I think you can conclude, as we're asking you to, that there's not an adverse, that there won't be a greater impact on Newell Creek. So that we ask you to make that finding tonight, if you would please. You close the hearing and record, and please make a recommendation to your city commission that they approve the application. And the applicant waives its final written arguments, and we appreciate you for your time and courtesy tonight.
Question?
Not of the applicant.
Thank you.
Question?
Thanks, Mike.
Everybody, 1, 2, 3. Thanks, Mike. We do. We want you to feel wanted.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Are you ready for me to write this?
Yeah, I am.
Yes, no, maybe?
I'm ready.
Okay, so closing this for planning commission deliberation.
Well, I'll just say, one of the reasons why I was late to the work session was because I was reading all those additional things that Mr. Nocita had put in, or grazing through them as fast as I could. Some of them are quite substantial, so I didn't read in hundreds of pages, but I am concerned about us getting new stuff so late and then expecting to be made, a decision to be made. But I am, you know, to me, it's all about the first question. And that is, does the city have protections in place to compensate for the change in zoning? And our stormwater manual, Josh, has requirements based on how much impervious surface you're creating. So whether it's a parking lot for an apartment complex or a parking lot for businesses, you know, however many square feet you're imperviating.
Yes, that's a good word, thank you, imperviating, I like that.
Whether it's 1 square foot or 100,000 square feet, we have a gradated system for that to ensure that things stay the same. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Can we put the gray, orange chart?
There you
Thank
go.
you.
Oop, back up. How did you just click one button and go like 7 pages fast?
Because it's computers.
They're good, man.
So from that aspect, I think there is some protections, and the amount, I mean, the questions that have been raised tonight and in some of these documents, I think are a more broad question. But, you know, I, to a certain extent, have to rely on the engineers about whether the numbers are appropriate. Is there enough mitigation for the volumes, for the temperatures and all that? I don't know, you know, how many degrees water cools based on what percentage of shade and all that. So when engineers tell me that there's enough protection in there, I have to kind of lean towards the engineer versus the attorney, or the layperson. There is value in, the anecdotes, but those other, places that we were asked to look at and such are examples of, well, the engineer said it was okay and the houses still slid down the, but, you know, it's, when I look at, actually the very things I was looking at were the ones that Mr. Robinson cited, which was that the, so I was going off of the email from Mr. Nocita earlier, which said, you know, the ordinance doesn't address goal 5, the rules we have in place don't address goal 5, but they do say protect stream quality. They do say protect wildlife. They do say, so while they don't say in accordance with goal 5, they do say to protect them. They do address them. In particular, the ordinance says that, and the implementing document to the ordinance, or the staff report cover letter to the ordinance says to protect wildlife. So I think we can, I can safely say that goal 5 was being addressed without being necessarily specifically called out. As to whether or not there's more, or there's enough protection for the interval, I just have to rely on the engineers to say that the answer is yes. If the answer is no, then I think all the other things brought forward are things that need to be considered. But at this point, I am on the side of no further analysis needed.
Carrie, my question involving that particular item is that I just want to clarify something that our esteemed counsel, Mr. Robinson, said. He said that if we find that there's no further analysis needed, then goal 5 is not relevant anymore. And I'm not understanding that because it's still valid and relevant. It's just, what the comment is that it's just not needing any additional analysis. And that
Goal 5 is satisfied.
Right, that's what I would say. It's satisfied, not that it's irrelevant anymore. So it's always relevant.
No, it's not always relevant. It's relevant to
In
a
this
comp
case,
plan amendment, zone
it's relevant in this case.
It's not relevant to breathing or eating or.
Well,
Yeah, it
yes,
is,
yes,
if you
it
want
is.
to breathe clean air
Yes,
and drink
exactly.
clean water.
It's relevant to life,
Okay, I
the universe, and
stand
everything.
Sorry.
We're getting feisty in our
Yeah,
age.
so anyway, I just want to make sure we have to, we're not quite there, but we have to change the tape just a little before 9:10. So if I interrupt anybody, I apologize in advance because we want to make sure everything gets on. So just again, taking a brief moment, how does somebody access the YouTube channel? I don't know what the name of our YouTube channel is.
Laura's looking it up.
She's looking it up, okay.
While
So
Laura's
you can let
looking-
me know.
We'll
when
let you
get
know.
there. Okay.
Before the tape runs out, I am going to ask you guys to make it's part of your motion tonight, assuming you're going to make a decision. I'm going to ask you to reject documents that you're not going to accept in the record as part of your formal motion. And I want to point out that I've just received word that at 7:18, Mr. Nocita submitted into the record the Oregon City Stormwater Management Plan from 2012. The record's closed, so I didn't receive it. So I want to include that in the list because the record's closed at this point. I just received it. I didn't know about it while the hearing was open, and Mr. Nocita testified and could have raised it in the list when we were going through that long litany. I mean, so again, that's another one I'd like to add to the list of items that will not be included in the record.
Okay, so let's go, while we're getting close to that, let's just go over that again, which ones we are not including.
My recommendation was item 4, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality State Agency Coordination Program. Everything except for one paragraph on page 29 and 30 of the Cascade Environmental Group Clackamas Cove Water Quality and Habitat Information Improvement Feasibility Study, item 5.
Okay,
And then an email that was sent at 7/18, including an Oregon City Stormwater Management Plan from 2012.
And we're not including the Oregon City MS4 permit as
'Cause it's
submitted by
already in-
Mr. Nocita
it's
because
already in
it's
the
already in the record.
Right, okay, I should have included that one, excuse me. Thank you for the clarification.
I think this is sort of a rhetorical question, but I will say that Mr. Robinson piqued my curiosity when, I remember sitting through this hearing, and I remember the volume of material that we had to review, and again, I guess I'm just trying to carefully say my words. I'm a little bit frustrated that this information was not made available some time ago so that we could have reviewed it as part of the original record. And it's just a little disconcerting.
It's divisive.
To try to make a decision with regard to information that could possibly be relevant, but I don't have any idea because I haven't been given the opportunity to review it to make that determination. So I'm kind of really puzzled by this.
Change the tape time?
Yes, okay, so we're gonna take a short recess while we change the tape, because it is the bewitching hour of tape changing. So everybody stand up and stretch and. call ourselves back into session and get down to the crux of the matter. Yes, so I think just in my own mind that we're now narrowly focused on an issue as to whether or not the city of Oregon City's standards and regulations are adequate to deal with the question at hand.
Changing the zone.
Yes, change in the zone. It's not whether or not the city's going to implement it, whether there's more stuff going in, there's more stuff going out. It's really, really a simple question, you know. So I think that's where we are, gentlemen.
I agree.
So let's have a motion.
Oh, it's a
Anybody?
complicated motion.
Paul's gonna do it, or Zach's gonna do it.
I have the agenda in front of me, so I'm gonna get the numbers.
Here, I'll flip back to the file number there for you.
Okay, thank you.
Also, if you feel like there's sufficient evidence in the record, you can make a decision or a tentative decision.
Okay.
And we need to talk
We
about
could,
the
you could make it,
additional evidence.
you could make a decision and adopt the staff reports and just make a decision and make a recommendation today. And then we don't have to come back at another meeting if you don't want to.
Okay, I think that's,
Assuming you're gonna do that first step.
Yes, let's do the first step with regard to the information that was submitted.
okay. So I recommend that we accept the information that we had discussed previously in the record. And I believe that's number 1, number 3,
One paragraph of 5.
1 paragraph of 5. The TMDL and 6, 7, and 8, I believe those are the pieces that we need to include, right?
From the testimony received today from Mr.
Yeah.
Nacita, of the
Okay.
testimony received today from Mr. Nacita.
Right, but the email that was brought in at 7:18 after the record was closed?
Well, the record was still open at that time.
The record was open at that time, but he didn't raise it as part of his testimony when we went through all of the things. And so I didn't have a reason to put it forward in the list.
I don't think there's any reason to include it now.
Right.
And so I also move to accept the staff reports written by staff
Sure, why don't you just,
for PZ.
just read the conclusion and recommendation.
Okay. So we believe that the comprehensive plan amendment located at Clackamas County, 3-204C, tax lots 700, 702, 900, 1201, 1300, 1400, 1500, 1600, and Clackamas County 32E04CD, 3300, 5900, 6000 can meet the requirements as described in the code.
And the next page, there's more.
And that the city has adequate tools to protect the stormwater and off-site, or on-site stormwater. And then also the conditions of approval. Therefore, we recommend that the the planning commission recommend to the city commission that they approve ZC 1503 and PZ 1501 with the conditions that are in the staff report as written.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved by Paul and seconded by Zach. Is there any further discussion?
I've got
Yeah.
something I want to say.
Yes, sir. Is it narrowly focused to the issue at hand
Oh,
on
boy,
whether or
is
not
it.
the city can adequately address its stormwater?
You talk about a marathon. This has been it. And it is a prime example, in my judgment, is how not to proceed with an application in terms of the process and appeal. And I think the planning commission staff, city staff has gone way out of the way in terms of due diligence to serve the public in the process, but that has been, that we've been required to follow in terms of quasi judicial. And it saddens me to think of the amount of money and time and effort and energy that we have as a city and a community put into this application for what I consider to be a divisive appeal. We always act, or at least try to act, in the public interest in good faith. In my years on this planning commission, I'm proud to serve with you people in terms of that aspect. You'll always put your foot together, or put your best foot forward in terms of good faith and due diligence. And this application bothers me. This is not the way to do the public's business. It's cost us tens of thousands of dollars to get to this point. And I just hope and pray that we continue on a positive manner for the growth and development of this community. There's too much interest involved in terms of the public interest that we should be bothered with this kind of an application. And I commend the applicants for their patience and staying with us. And I support Damon. That was a good analysis and a good motion that you put together. And so with that, I'm going to support this.
That was Paul's motion.
Was it Paul?
Yes.
Well,
Damon did a lot of.
okay, you two together.
It-
But anyway,
Very critic, so.
I don't mean to put a cloud over this,
You
but.
just dissed Paul, I'm sorry.
I'll get over it.
But anyway, that's the extent of my comment.
Mr. Mahoney, while I do not fundamentally agree with you, I do fundamentally agree with you, let me take that back. I fundamentally agree with you, but as a democracy, at least when I got up this morning, it was still a democracy.
That's debatable.
Again, like I said, when I got up, it was still a democracy. When I got up this morning, it was still a democracy, and regardless of whether we agree or disagree with someone's opinion about whether they like an application, appeal it or not, we have a process, and I respect the process. Everyone has the right to their opinion, and that is the way, at least I was brought up to understand how the democracy works. So we are working our way through the process. Yes, it does take time. Yes, it does take money, but it is the process. And that is why we don't live in Russia or someplace else where there is no process and you can go to jail for even looking at somebody sideways. So let's have the vote.
Well, then, Vern, you have a comment?
Commissioner Maybe?
Oh, you're starting with me, thanks.
Yes.
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin?
I told him to pick on.
Commissioner Espy?
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right.
The-
Oh, you forgot Commissioner Johnson.
Oh, sorry.
Boy.
Sorry, step back.
I have an old sheet here.
Oh, my gosh.
Apologize.
Do we have to
Commissioner
start this
Johnson.
meeting over?
Yes, we have to start the meeting all over.
Aye.
It's all your fault, Vern.
For the public, the city commission hearing is scheduled for July 5th, which is a Thursday, because the 4th of July is our normal scheduled hearing on a Wednesday, so it is the next day, July 5th,
Yeah, that's our neighborhood. We won't be here. All right, so we
here in
have
this room.
one more item for consideration, which should be fairly quick because it is not a
Open.
public hearing. It is a adoption of findings of fact and conclusions of law. Do I need to go, I don't need to go through the spiel because it's not a hearing.
No, but we need
Have
to
the
ask if there are any
conflicts? Okay.
conflicts or,
Okay, gentlemen, are there any conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, and did you all visit the site again, or you are familiar with the site?
I'm familiar,
since the
but.
last
Since
meeting.
the last
You don't need
meeting.
to disclose ones you've already disclosed.
Okay, so Mr. Mahoney, we'll start with you quickly.
No conflicts that I know of.
All right,
Nothing new to add here.
Nothing here.
Nothing new.
Nothing.
and I do not have anything to add as well. Okay, so we have, since does anybody in the audience want to contest our not having any further contacts or visiting this particular site again since the last application? Okay, great, thank you. All right, staff.
Okay, on May 14th, the Planning Commission tentatively approved the application before you by a vote of 5-1. And directed us to return to you with final findings. These findings of fact and conclusions of law explain how the applicants met its legal burden of proof to demonstrate that all of the applicable criteria for the zone change and annexation are met. And the applicant's attorney will summarize some of this. And they include the updated conditions of approval as directed by the commission, and also reflecting updated transportation system plan project costs from John Replinger. And that's why I've invited John Replinger to discuss any of those if you have questions about them this evening. So with your approval of this annexation and zone change, 92 acres in the Park Place area will be brought into the city and zoned from the county zoning to R10, R5, and neighborhood commercial. And as you know, there are quite a few conditions of approval attached to this application, including the important requirement to submit a master plan for consideration by the Planning Commission, and that master plan will address phasing of improvements, not the least of which are transportation connections between Holcomb Boulevard and Redland Road and filtering onto Abernathy and 213. So I won't go into any more detail on those. If you have specific questions about those revised transportation system plan project costs and numbers, please feel free to call on John. The overall projects add up to approximately $1.8 million in proportional share. That the applicant would be responsible for paying. Any questions for me?
I don't have any questions about any of the specifics. I have a question on Appendix A under conditions of approval on a couple of items. Just a clarification, it does not have anything to do with transportation system plan.
Okay.
So on number 5, I'm a big may and shall person.
Okay.
And the second sentence starts, for any of the properties subject to this annexation, comma, the applicant may be obligated. Why is that not shall be obligated to subsequent conditions, et cetera, et cetera? There's lots of other shalls, which I really love because that is really, really clear. That's a may. A may means maybe they aren't, maybe they aren't, and I think it should be a shall.
Okay.
You got shalls every place else.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, then let me get to the second one.
Sure.
On number 6, there's a A. It says Redland Road, and then line 2, 3, the line that says the applicant must demonstrate either the following. Why is that not a shall demonstrate? And then we already talked about the starting the sentences with a prepositional phrase, which you're going to reword, so I'm okay with that. It's just the subject and the verb are in the wrong place. So I got my two mays. Or must.
You must.
But a must and a shall are the same thing.
I don't think so. It's not how I learned it in law school.
No, it shall.
It sure works in contract law when I'm negotiating and
Well, I'm telling you,
arbitrating.
contracts was my best class, so.
Yeah, well,
Okay, so 5. May?
Well, I think that until we know what the proposal is as part of the future transportation planning analysis, we don't know if there will be a proportionate share and additional conditions may be required. If they may not be required depending on what the transportation analysis shows. I don't think I mean, we've opened, the intent was to open the door to make it clear that we're gonna evaluate this when we know exactly what the transportation analysis shows. That's why we've sort of identified what we think it will show in A through whatever the letters are.
Yeah, A
But we're
through-
saying, but we're not married to any of that stuff.
through K.
We're going to reevaluate when the transportation study comes in. And
Okay.
it may require additional conditions, it may not, we don't know.
Okay, well, let me step out on the edge of the diving platform and walk the plank. I would surmise that there are going to be substantial development impacts, and I can't give you proof in terms of engineering technology or geotechnical technology, but having watched that area over the last 20-plus years, the cumulative development that is occurring there is all gonna come to a head if it hasn't already, and if you talk to the people in Park Place, it's already there. So to me, this is sort of weaseling in a little bit of a way, because I do like all the things that were stated in A through L, A through K, and they're very, very specific about what things shall be. So for me, I guess it's just a matter of semantics. I strongly believe that there are going to be subsequent conditions of approval to mitigate the development impacts. How could there not be? Everything that I have heard and seen with regard to this particular application, even though we're not dealing with development, but we know what the possibility of the development is, leads me to that conclusion. I just don't see any way around that there aren't going to be any. If there was, I would be completely shocked. So that's why I'm reading it that way in terms of, yeah, there's going to be substantial development impacts.
If you put a shall in there, then what you're saying is that this is an incomplete document. And
No, I don't see it that way.
Yeah, because you're saying there's going to be subsequent conditions of approval. Why aren't they in the document if there's additional conditions of approval? So if we don't have them yet, then there may not be additional
Well,
obligations.
especially if it's gonna be based on another study. If the conditions of approval are based on another study that hasn't been done yet, then I think it does have to be a may, because we don't know whether or not that study, I mean, I agree that there's probably gonna be, we're gonna need more conditions of approval, most definitely, but whether or not that particular study is gonna generate any.
Well,
is
I
anybody's
understand where
guess.
you're coming from. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that there is no
Therefore, may.
way that may is going to be used to get out of something. Because this is a pay to play. You want to play, you pay.
Agreed.
It says, by participating in funding of both TSP and non-PSP project, regardless of whether those projects are listed in conditions of approval for this annexation and zone change pursuant to applicable approval criteria for a master plan.
Yeah,
mean,
I
I can't-
think there's protections in there.
Okay, well, I just wanted to hear it.
And I don't have any problem with the shall and the must, if you
Yeah.
like shall better than must.
Oh, yeah, the applicant shall demonstrate, because they have to. They can't just weasel that out.
I suppose must is just as imperative, but.
Yeah, it's a legal
I
term.
like
word.
shall better.
I like shall better. Okay, all right. Gentlemen,
No, I got more.
go.
3 and 4 on conditions of approval.
Yep, I'm reading.
Is it 92 or 91 acres? I asked this last time,
Yeah.
and they still never got changed.
Yeah, it keeps flipping,
bunch.
doesn't it?
So, Appendix A, number 3 and number 4 both refer to 91 acre
Well,
property.
if it's 92 and we say 91, then it's only 91, that's all.
Yeah, he gets a whole free acre to run around and be obligated to do
They
something.
can't do anything with it because it wouldn't be part of the project.
90 plus?
Well, it
No, we
says
can't,
90
we can't say 90 plus. No,
It
it's
says
gotta be,
92 on
it's gotta
all the
be
other
very
documents.
I would say
specific.
approximately 92.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
What
you
do-
say 92 in every place else.
Well,
and-
92 is in the first, on
Yeah.
page 1. It
Right.
says approximately 92
Okay,
acres.
just let them fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
That's what I'm
please
saying,
fix
so
it.
fix that. And then my issue goes back to your internal document, the before Appendix A, page 4.
Thank you, I did have time to read this at least twice.
And it goes to your attempt to address my concerns about Holly Lane. So it's the,
Sorry.
The party's over. Are we on page 3 or?
Page 4.
Oh, page 4, okay.
So the first large paragraph starts, however, the planning commission also acknowledges the Holly Lane. My concern was that particularly the connection between Livesey and Livesey, whatever.
It's Livesey.
Between L and H
Livesey.
and Holcomb, that it be prioritized, that the development doesn't just happen through those 3 stubs with all the dump trucks coming and going through there, and that it's, oh, now that we've built all that out, maybe we'll put in Holly Lane at some point. That whole 92 acres is supposed to be developed is in some sort of phasing. And I really think we need to say in some way that Holly Lane is part of the Phase 1 development plan. Whether it's,
I don't disagree with that.
At the same time, they're building those buildings, but, if Holly Lane's supposed to be the main way in and out, then we need to make sure the main way in and out is developed and before people develop habits of going through everybody else's neighborhood. So,
Just Holly Lane is somebody's neighborhood as well.
well, yeah, but it's their neighborhood. So, I'm not sure how to
Damon,
say
would that come with the master plan,
Does
approach?
number 4 in the conditions of approval address it?
No, it just talks about Holly Lane being.
Says proposed
but
phasing
it's-
of major roads to ensure timely connection to Holly Lane and analysis of utility phasing can blah, blah, blah,
But
blah,
that's,
blah.
that's,
Yeah,
that's
some-
addressing the entire
entire,
Holly Lane
yeah.
connection.
Yeah.
Which, more than half of it isn't even in consideration.
Right, because it's out in
So,
the county.
I think it needs to say, that in some way that the Holly Lane, the portion of Holly Lane within this area needs to be part of Phase 1.
Then it needs to be in part of one of the conditions of approval, which is what we had specifically.
But we talked about how, they only have to improve Holly Lane if the drive warrants necessitate improving Holly Lane, right? If they had one house and they use these existing stub streets, that wouldn't trigger the need for Holly Lane. Right? I mean,
He's
so.
not talking about development of housing, he's talking about.
I am.
Well, no, development of the entire thing. So before the house gets built, what happens to the area? There's construction of streets, water, sewer, and that's all part of the construction, traffic, and everything else he's talking about. It's more than just building that house, it's everything that happens prior to that one house or whatever number of houses there.
Yeah, and the arterial connector should be in place before you worry about the capillaries.
I don't disagree that that's an important consideration, but I think it's premature to add a condition like that before a master plan.
That's, but
That's probably true.
But if it's a concern that we want to see addressed in the master plan, then they need to know that. And now, granted, the applicant's attorney's here, they know that, but,
We could get hit by a bus tomorrow and that's the end of it.
well, and so, and it, maybe the economics turn around and it's 15 years before they come back with a master plan. So, I think, that something that says that the Holly Lane connector in this, the portion of Holly Lane within this needs to be prioritized before general development begins, or that it's part of Phase 1, or something that makes it clear that, you need to have a spine before you can have arms and legs, or I don't know, I'm anecdoting, but.
Something to the effect of the construction of the portion of Holly Lane within the city of Oregon City boundaries shall be included as part of the
First phase of the master.
first
plan.
phase of a master plan. Is that what you're talking about?
Does that work?
I don't have any problem with adding that as a sentence after the term Journey Drive here in the recommendation. My issue is having it be a condition. because I think that this is all gonna come down to the updated transportation impact analysis for the master plan. And I have no problem with having that be a primary consideration as part of the conducting of the transportation impact analysis in this recommendation. But requiring them to build Holly Lane as phase one as a condition, when we haven't done the transportation impact
Yeah,
analysis
I'm-
yet.
No, I'm okay with it being in this paragraph as opposed to a specific condition.
Okay.
I just, because, yeah, there's a lot of things that go into it, I mean,
Okay.
you know, but, I just am very concerned that, you know, there's no, like, straight shot on Cattleman's Drive. There's 4 turns, and there's very mature street trees that, you know, even my truck with, you know, I was clipping branches, so, you know, I could see, you know, tree limbs getting broke down because the drivers, you know, the dump truck drivers are going, and yes, they have to be mitigated for, but, you know, if they just drive where they're supposed to, you know, which is through their construction site as opposed to, you know, everybody else's construction, you know, everybody else's neighborhood to get to the edge of their construction site.
Okay, so
So I'm
if
okay.
we add it after we talked
Journey
about Journey Drive
yeah.
with what I said, is that gonna work for you?
And you want to just say it for the record?
Well, I said it, but I have to see if I put the consideration of the construction of Holly Lane shall be a part of the phase one master plan process.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. So it doesn't necessarily require it to be built, but it needs to be,
Considered.
yeah, and it needs to be part of the master plan also.
So Johnson, she'll probably be working on that. Got that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Got it, Mike?
I'm not gonna get out of anything. I got it.
Got it, okay. We wanna make sure we get it, we got it.
Okay, so with that, I'm prepared to move that we accept the,
So can we just read that one sentence with a new sentence in it so we're all clear?
okay? Well, it would be just a new sentence after the word Journey Drive in
Right.
that paragraph. It would say, you wrote it down.
I know, I'm looking over it, Ms. Richter.
That portion of Holly Lane within the development needs to be prioritized to be part of the phase, included in the phase one development.
Yes.
That's how I would word it.
Okay, well, he specifically used master plan, so. I
Well,
wanna-
phase one, I mean, that.
Phase one master plan.
Phase one master
So
plan.
is Holly Lane is not part of the development.
Well, it is.
Within the development.
Yeah.
I said that portion of Holly Lane within the development.
You'd say detailed development plan because that's the first phase.
The detailed development plan, okay.
You know,
Cite the
that
right
would-
term.
That would require that Holly Lane be part of the master plan. Otherwise, the city's gonna gonna be involved in the acquisition of right-of-way.
Don't make this more complicated.
Yes, please don't make it more complicated. We want it in there,
Well,
we
no,
got
I'm
it
just
in there.
looking at the reality of things, you see.
Yeah.
If you want these things to come together, you know,
Well, they're paying, it's pay to play, that's what I said.
So I move we accept the findings of fact and conclusions of law as amended, approving the application for City of Oregon City file number AN 16007 and ZC 16005.
Is there a second?
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Don't
Commissioner
forget
Mabey?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes. Commissioner Henkin.
Aye.
Commissioner Espy.
No.
Commissioner Mahoney.
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff.
Commissioner Johnson.
Sorry, Commissioner Johnson.
That's what I said. Okay, what about Commissioner Johnson?
And
Commissioner McGriff.
Aye.
Motion carries.
The city commission hearing for this agenda item will be scheduled for June 20th in this room, 7 PM.
Do we have any communications?
Yeah, I just want to give you an update of what is coming down the line. So June 25th, we are going to have a joint work session with our Transportation Advisory Committee, or our TAC, and we're going to learn
When is
about
that?
We jumped
June
over the minutes.
25th, our next scheduled hearing,
Okay, I didn't think.
Not, you mean our next scheduled meeting?
meeting
Yeah.
is going to be a work session,
Okay.
2 weeks from tonight, and it'll
Chair
be,
McGriff, we jumped over the minutes.
We still have to adopt minutes.
Oh,
But that's okay. Go ahead.
Are we finished? Okay,
Yep.
almost done. So it'll be a joint work session with TAC. We will have John Riplinger of Riplinger and Associates, our transportation engineer consultant. He will inform us all about the transportation planning process and how development gets analyzed. We do this every year. So we'll have a work session. It'll be nice to have you and TAC in the same hearing. We also are inviting CIC, but it's really a joint work session between you two and our neighborhood associations, because it's always good information to know. The meeting after that is July 9th, and that is scheduled to be canceled. So,
We clearly haven't kicked enough cans down the road.
well, don't we have another group that we can have a work session with? I want to keep that process going.
yeah, I would like to, we actually don't have anything tentatively scheduled for the second meeting in July, so I would like to do a work session then too. So I'll find a group, see who is available, and,
But what about for the first meeting in July?
we could do that if
Let's
the
just-
commission wishes.
Yes, let's just keep them moving.
Would you prefer, so the commission would like to have a meeting on July 9th?
If we're just having a work session, it will be a very short meeting, and we might as well just keep the process moving with our folks, because, you know, half the year's already over, and we haven't really met with anybody. When are we meeting with Natural Resources?
I'll have to check and see some other groups' availability. So it sounds like Natural Resources is high on the priority list.
Yeah.
Anybody else, if they can't make it?
HRB.
HRB?
Yeah.
Okay.
She already got tagged, so yeah, that's.
I don't know about those Transportation Advisory Committee people. They are really a cantankerous bunch. You can't tell them anything.
But it's only the ones that are awake.
Well, what about the rest of them?
They're fine.
I will check for availability. If there is no availability, we'll cancel, and then we'll schedule the work session in July as well.
So who else, we've got Natural Resources, HRB,
Tag.
TAC, PRAC.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have done some work sessions this year. I have to go back and take a look
Yeah,
at what
yeah,
we've
we've done
done.
one with
Because
PRAC.
some of these we have met with,
How about Metro?
The Metro Council.
you've done your city commission,
Why
so.
not?
I will
Well,
try and schedule you. I
I
hear it
know
loud
the
and
new
clear you would
chair.
like to meet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
That's
Just trying to
be
give you a
good or
break.
bad.
Cool, I appreciate it, especially because it'll be a weird week for vacations and stuff.
I'd rather work. I'd rather just get through them and meet with people and let them know what's going on.
see what's on their
Does
mind.
anybody have any issues with the minutes, or can I make a motion to adopt them in mass?
That would be great.
Second.
Move approval of all draft minutes in item 5A.
Minutes of September 25th, 2017, the minutes of October 9th, 2017, October 23rd, 2017, November 13th, 2017, and November 27th, 2017.
Yeah, what she said.
Second.
It's been seconded. It's been moved and seconded. Start with Commissioner Johnson, please.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
I was wondering, are you still over there?
Commissioner Maybe.
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin.
Aye.
Commissioner Espy.
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney.
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff.
Aye. Just
Motion-
checking, Vern, just checking.
Well,
I know, because I lean forward and kind of block him and nobody
had to
can see
think
around me.
things out a little bit there.
You're just trying to sneak out of stuff, I can tell.
No, I was trying to get you to vote first.
Chair never votes first.
Yeah, Chair's always last, that's.
Well, not always. This chair,
That's
That's
right.
what we've established.
and
The last word,
change
so,
that.
yeah, I think it's it. I just,
Whack that thing then.
I guess I have a couple of questions about, which I'll ask staff after we're off the record.
We are, you just whacked that thing.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.
We got out of here before 10 and we didn't even have to vote about being here before 10.
Look at this